You just got that raise you've been waiting for, and for about 5 minutes, you felt like you'd finally made it. Maybe you celebrated with a nice dinner out, or perhaps you started mentally spending that extra money on things you've been putting off. But then reality hits you like a freight train carrying a cargo full of grocery bills. Somehow, despite earning more money than ever before, your bank account still feels like it's running on fumes, and you're left wondering if you're losing your mind or if the entire economy is playing some cruel joke on you. Well, I've got news for you. You're not crazy, and you're definitely not alone. The harsh truth is that your raise probably isn't enough to keep up with the relentless march of inflation that's been quietly pickpocketing your purchasing power while you weren't looking. My name is Nick, and I help people understand why their money doesn't seem to stretch as far as it used to and what they can actually do about it. If you're tired of feeling like you're running on a financial treadmill that keeps speeding up no matter how hard you work, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if this information helps you figure out what's really going on with your money. Here's something that might shock you. The annual inflation rate for the United States hit 3% for the 12 months ending in September. And while that might not sound like much, here's the kicker. Prices are now 23% higher than they were in February of 2020. 23%. That means if you were spending $100 on groceries back then, you'd need to spend $123 today to buy the exact same items. But here's where it gets really interesting and honestly a little depressing. Most people's raises haven't come close to matching that increase. Let me break down what's actually happening to your paycheck, because the numbers tell a story that most employers would rather you didn't understand. Between July of last year and July of this year, the average wage grew by 3.9%. That sounds pretty good, right? Wrong. When you account for inflation, that real wage growth shrinks down to just 1.5%. 1.5%, that's an extra $18 per week in actual purchasing power. $18, that's barely enough to cover the increased cost of a single grocery trip. Now, you might be thinking that at least wages are growing faster than inflation, and technically you'd be correct. But here's what nobody talks about. That comparison only works if you ignore the cumulative impact of inflation over the past few years. It's like saying you're winning a race when you're still 20 meters behind the starting line from where everyone else began. You might be gaining ground now, but you're still nowhere near caught up to where you should be. The conference board predicts that salary increase budgets for this year will rise by an average of 3.9%. Sounds decent until you realize that this is basically just treading water. If inflation continues at its current pace, you're looking at maybe 0.5% of real purchasing power increase if you're lucky. And that's assuming you actually get that full 3.9% raise, which, let's be honest, many people won't. But wait, it gets worse. The categories that hit your wallet the hardest are experiencing inflation rates that make the overall average look like a gentle breeze. Let's talk about housing. Because unless you're living in your parents' basement, this is probably your biggest expense. Like, as the median home price as of April was $437,000. That's up 44% since 2020, 44% in just 5 years. Meanwhile, mortgage rates have doubled compared to what they were half a decade ago. If you're thinking about buying a house, you now need a household income of almost $117,000 to comfortably afford a home. $117,000. That's not exactly what most people would call an entry-level salary, and if you're already a homeowner, don't think you're off the hook. Property taxes have risen an average of 27% from 2019 to 2024, and here's the fun part. Once they go up, they rarely come back down. Your utility bills aren't doing you any favors either. Electricity and gas bills have increased nearly 30% since 2021, and almost 40% since 2019. So even if you own your home outright, the cost of actually living in it keeps climbing. It's like playing a video game where the difficulty level increases every month, but your character's stats stay the same. Food prices tell a similar story of financial frustration. While the overall inflation rate for food was relatively modest at one point, 9% in February, don't let that fool you. The category that includes meat, poultry, fish, and eggs was up 7.7%. And if you've bought eggs recently, you know they hit an all-time high in February. Eggs. The thing that used to be the cheapest protein source at the grocery store now costs more than some cuts of meat used to cost. Gasoline rose 4.1% in September alone, and it was the largest single factor driving up the overall monthly inflation rate. So every time you fill up your tank, you're getting a front row seat to watching your purchasing power evaporate in real time. It's almost impressive how many different ways the economy has found to squeeze more money out of your paycheck without actually asking for permission. Here's what makes this whole situation particularly maddening. The people making these inflation calculations love to talk about how modest the current rates are, but they're comparing month-to-month changes instead of looking at the cumulative damage over the past few years. It's like measuring how fast water is leaking from a bucket by only looking at the last drop instead of noticing that the bucket is already half empty. The Yale Budget Lab estimates that the average household will pay about $2,500 more this year due to current economic policies. $2,500. That's more than most people's annual raise, which means you're actually going backward financially, even if you got a decent bump in salary. What's really happening here is a massive transfer of wealth that most people don't even realize is occurring. While your salary might be growing at 3 or 4%, the costs of everything you actually need to survive are growing much faster. It's like being told you're getting a promotion while your responsibilities triple and your resources get cut in half. This isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. This is about real people making real sacrifices just to maintain the same standard of living they had a few years ago. People are driving older cars longer, postponing home purchases, skipping vacations, and making countless small compromises that add up to a significantly different lifestyle from what their income should theoretically support. The most frustrating part is that many people blame themselves for not feeling financially secure despite earning more money than ever before. They think they're bad at budgeting or that they're spending too much on unnecessary things when the reality is that the entire economic landscape has shifted underneath them without warning. But here's the thing that nobody wants to talk about. This isn't just a temporary blip that's going to resolve itself once supply chains get sorted out, or once some magical economic equilibrium is restored. The structural forces driving inflation aren't going anywhere, and waiting around for things to get better on their own is probably not the smartest strategy. The reality is that your employer probably thinks they're being generous when they offer you that annual raise. They might even pat themselves on the back for giving you more than the company down the street. But what they're not telling you, and what they might not even realize themselves, is that they're essentially handing you a pay cut wrapped in a shiny promotion bow. Think about it this way. If you were making $50,000 in 2020 and you've received a 3% raise every year since then, you're now earning about $58,000. Congratulations, you've climbed the corporate ladder. Except here's the problem. That $50,000 in 2020 had the same purchasing power as about $61,500 today. So despite your consistent raises and stellar performance reviews, you're actually earning $3,500 less in real terms than you were 5 years ago. It's like being told you're getting a bigger slice of pizza while someone quietly makes the entire pizza smaller. Sure, your slice looks impressive until you realize there's barely enough to satisfy your hunger. The median weekly earnings for a full-time worker is just over $1,000, which works out to roughly $52,000 per year before taxes. After federal taxes, state taxes, Social Security, and Medicare take their cut, that number shrinks to somewhere between $35,000 and $40,000 in take-home pay. Now try making that stretch to cover rent or mortgage payments that have increased 40%, food costs that keep climbing, and utility bills that seem determined to reach new heights every month. This is where the math gets really depressing. Let's say you're that median worker taking home $38,000 annually. If your housing costs consume the recommended 30% of your income, that's $11,400 per year, or about $950 per month. Good luck finding a decent place to live for $950 in most parts of the country. You're more likely to find a parking space that costs that much. But let's assume you somehow manage to keep your housing costs reasonable. Food is supposed to represent about 12 to 15% of your budget, which would be around $4,500 to $5,700 annually. That works out to about $400 per month for groceries. Have you been to a grocery store lately? $400 might cover 2 weeks if you're careful and don't mind eating ramen noodles with a side of disappointment. Transportation typically eats up another 15 to 20% of your income, so we're talking about $6,000 annually or $500 per month. Between car payments, insurance, gas, and maintenance, $500 per month is optimistic unless you're driving a 10-year-old Honda and praying it doesn't break down. Add up just those three categories and you're already at $21,400 annually, leaving you with about $16,600 for everything else. Everything else includes clothing, healthcare, entertainment, savings, emergency fund contributions, retirement planning, and those pesky little things like phone bills, internet, and the occasional cup of coffee that costs more than a gallon of gas used to cost. $16,600 for everything else works out to about $1,300 per month. Now try building wealth, planning for retirement, or handling any unexpected expenses on $1,300 monthly. It's like trying to fill a swimming pool with a garden hose while someone else drains it with a fire hose. This is why so many people feel like they're drowning financially, despite doing everything they were told to do. They went to school, got decent jobs, received regular raises, and followed all the conventional financial advice, yet they're still struggling to build any meaningful wealth or financial security. The average household spends about $5,577 per month, according to recent data, which adds up to roughly $67,000 annually. But remember, that's household spending, not individual spending. And it assumes people are actually able to spend that much. Many households are spending that much by going into debt, not because they can afford it. Credit card debt tells the real story of what's happening to American families. The average household is carrying over $9,000 in credit card debt. $9,000 at 20% interest means they're paying $1,800 per year just in interest charges. That's money that disappears forever, providing nothing but temporary relief from the crushing reality that expenses have outpaced income growth. What makes this situation particularly cruel is that people often blame themselves for their financial struggles. They think they're bad at budgeting or lack discipline, when the reality is that the entire system has been rigged against them. It's like playing a rigged carnival game where the rules change every time you start winning. But here's where things get really interesting, and this is the part where we stop being victims of circumstance and start becoming strategic players in this economic game. Because while most people are busy complaining about inflation or hoping their boss will suddenly become generous with raises, smart money is taking action to protect and grow their purchasing power. The first thing you need to understand is that traditional savings accounts are essentially guaranteed wealth destruction machines during inflationary periods. If you're earning 1% interest on your savings while inflation runs at 3%, you're losing 2% of your purchasing power every year. Your money is literally becoming less valuable while you're trying to be responsible by saving it. This is where investment strategy becomes crucial, not just for building wealth, but for basic financial survival. Treasury inflation protected securities, or TIPS, are designed specifically to protect against inflation. These government bonds adjust their principal value based on inflation rates, ensuring your investment keeps pace with rising prices. They're not going to make you rich, but they'll prevent inflation from making you poor. Series I savings bonds are another inflation-fighting tool that most people don't know about. These bonds issued between May and October of this year have a fixed rate of 1.1% plus an inflation adjustment of 2.86%, giving you a total yield of almost 4%. That's significantly better than letting your money sit in a traditional savings account earning basically nothing while inflation eats away at it. But bonds and savings accounts are just the defensive part of the strategy. If you really want to get ahead of inflation, you need assets that don't just keep pace with rising prices, but actually benefit from them. Real estate has historically been one of the best inflation hedges available because property values and rental income tend to rise along with everything else. Stocks, particularly those of companies that can pass increased costs along to consumers, also tend to perform well during inflationary periods. Companies that sell essential goods and services, own valuable resources, or have strong pricing power can often maintain their profit margins even when their costs increase. And commodities represent another inflation hedge that many people overlook. When the price of everything goes up, the price of raw materials like gold, oil, agricultural products, and industrial metals often goes up even faster. You don't need to become a commodity trader to benefit from this trend. There are simple investment funds that give you exposure to commodity prices without the complexity of direct ownership. The key is building a diversified portfolio that includes multiple types of inflation-resistant assets rather than putting all your eggs in one basket. This isn't about getting rich quick or making risky bets on speculative investments. This is about basic financial self-defense in an environment where your purchasing power is under constant attack. But investing isn't the only weapon in your anti-inflation arsenal, and honestly, it shouldn't be your first move if you're still struggling to make ends meet each month. Before you start worrying about building wealth, you need to focus on not bleeding money from 1,000 tiny cuts that most people don't even notice. It's like trying to fill a bucket that has holes in the bottom. You can pour water in as fast as you want, but if you don't plug those holes first, you're just wasting your time and energy. This is where most financial advice completely misses the mark. Everyone wants to talk about investing strategies and compound interest, but nobody wants to address the boring reality that most people are hemorrhaging money on stuff they don't even remember buying. The average American has subscriptions they forgot about that cost them hundreds of dollars annually. Streaming services, gym memberships, software subscriptions, and random monthly charges that seemed like a good idea 6 months ago, but now just quietly drain your account every month. Here's a fun exercise that will probably depress you. Go through your bank statements from the past 3 months and add up every subscription, every automatic payment, and every recurring charge. I guarantee you'll find at least 2 or 3 things you completely forgot about. That's free money you're giving away to companies that are betting you're too lazy or too busy to cancel services you don't use. But subscription auditing is just the beginning. The real money is in the big categories that dominate your budget, and this is where strategic thinking can save you serious cash. Take transportation, for example. The average American spends over $900 monthly on transportation costs, including car payments, insurance, gas, and maintenance. $900? Hi, that's more than many people pay in rent in some parts of the country. Now, I'm not suggesting you should start riding a bicycle to work in a blizzard, but there are ways to dramatically reduce transportation costs without completely destroying your quality of life. Buying a reliable used car instead of financing something new can save you hundreds of dollars monthly. Choosing a vehicle based on fuel efficiency rather than how impressive it looks in your driveway can cut your gas costs significantly. Shopping around for car insurance annually instead of just auto-renewing whatever policy you've had for years can save hundreds of dollars. The same principle applies to housing, which is typically your largest expense and therefore your biggest opportunity for savings. I'm not telling you to move into a cardboard box, but small changes can have massive impacts. Getting a roommate can cut your housing costs in half. Moving to a slightly less trendy neighborhood might save you hundreds monthly while barely affecting your daily life. Negotiating with your landlord for a long-term lease in exchange for a rent reduction can lock in savings for years. Look, your raise isn't enough. and pretending otherwise is like putting a band-aid on a broken leg. The economy has fundamentally changed the rules while you were busy being a responsible adult. But now you know what's really happening, and knowledge is power. Start protecting your purchasing power today through smart investing, ruthless expense cutting, and strategic income increases. Your future self will thank you for taking action instead of just hoping things magically get better